The International Monetary Fund has warned that the economic fallout from COVID-19 could make the 2008 financial crisis and even the Great Depression look tame. Their best-case scenario, a 3% decline in the global economy. Is this pessimism justified? What about stimulus measures? Will they work as well under these extraordinary circumstances? And is anyone thinking about the global south? And coming up later, claims that China is trying to control the coronavirus narrative surface again in some foreign media. Is it a genuine issue or the latest chapter in attempts to blame China for their own outbreaks? Welcome to The Point, coming to you from Beijing. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. As much of the world remains in lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic, national economies are in crisis. On Tuesday, the International Monetary Fund warned that the global economy is set to experience its worst recession since the Great Depression, and governments around the world are scrambling to contain the economic fallout. What's different this time? How will the crisis impact lives? And how should governments and international organizations respond? To discuss these questions and more, I'm joined via Skype by Doug Henwood, an economic journalist and host of the radio show Behind the News in New York City. And on the phone from Shanghai, Mr. Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novel Arcae Technologies. Thank you both for being here, gentlemen. I want to go to you first, Doug. A negative 3% growth. That is dramatic. I mean, a 6 percentage point decline from the IMF's January forecast over there you see in the picture. First of all, I want to get your take on this forecast. What do you think of the IMF's projections?
Well, their forecasts are based on the idea that there'll be a relatively quick recovery from the disease, and following that, a relatively quick recovery in the broad economy, not in the U.S. and around the world. I'm skeptical about both things. We really have a hard time predicting the course of the disease, but even if it does clear or begin to clear in significant ways in a relatively few months, the economic damage is going to be very, very severe. We have now the unemployment rate in the U.S. is probably going to be 15 to 20% when the job report gets released beginning of May. We're compressing an economic shock on the magnitude of what the U.S. experienced between 1929 and 32 into the space of a couple of months. It's just the most, it took 3 or 4 years for the Great Depression to unroll, and we're doing this in a couple of months. Whole businesses are shutting down, restaurants, hotels, retail stores, and it's not going to be easy to reopen those. So I think some of this damage is going to be more severe, but to the IMF's credit, it said all of the risks to their forecast are on the downside, and they did note that they were making a lot of optimistic assumptions, so I think it could well be worse than what they're forecasting, is what I'm saying.
Correct. The IMF did say that their projection is based on the baseline scenario where the pandemic will be contained in the first half of the year. And if the pandemic persists and drags on to the second half of the year, there could be alternative scenarios. And Jiahe, I want to go to you. Are you worried that the worst or worse case scenarios might become a reality? How should nations and their policymakers prepare for that?
Well, I actually do think that, China has a famous doctor called Zhang Hongwen. He's actually a very famous doctor in Shanghai regarding the pandemic things. And he has made the prediction. I think that's the prediction that we should look at, which is, I think, what will happen in the future. That he said that the pandemic will be eased a lot in the summer. It might re-emerge in autumn, but not at that larger scale, as I remembered. There are a few reasons, actually, behind this, which you look at them. The first one is the weather. The weather is really important in determining the spreading of the coronavirus. If you look at all the countries that are not suffered severely because of the coronavirus, many of them are in tropical areas, and yet there is no one tropical area country that is strongly affected because of the coronavirus. That means summer does help to contain the virus. The second is that all the countries are so aware for the moment. I mean, the coronavirus had the element of surprise in the very first place. But now everyone is so concerned. Even Italy has got the case of dropping for like a week or two. I mean, the new discovered cases has been dropped for like a week or two in Italy. So it's actually everyone is so prepared, and with the help of the summer, it's very possible for you to see the case to drop in the summer. But it might re-emerge in autumn. But as all the countries are so prepared, it can't be so serious in autumn.
Well, we do see signs of stabilization, especially in Western Europe. Doug, I want to go to you again. Countries have launched stimulus packages. Let's talk about the United States first. $2 trillion stimulus package, the largest in U.S. history. That includes a $1,000 handout to individuals, funding to small businesses. How do you expect those measures to work, especially considering the times we're living under, quarantines, lockdowns, and restricted business activities?
Well, you know, they're helpful, but there are an awful lot of problems in implementation so far. The small business assistance is nearly impossible to get, from what reports I hear. It's being administered through banks, and they're doing a very poor job of it. The amount of money that people are getting, you know, $1,200 per person, roughly, is not enough to live more than a week or two on. So people who lose their jobs are really going to have a hard time living on that stimulus check. You know, they're increasing the unemployment benefit, but it's still pretty meager. So it's certainly helpful, but it's not going to solve all our economic problems. For the longer term, the problem in the United States, and this is really far worse here than it is in other countries, I think. We have a whole bunch of problems that have made this far worse, and getting out of this problem would require some major policy changes. We have a completely collapsing physical infrastructure in the country. We have a really poor public health infrastructure. We have really, really diminished state capacity. The level of incompetence that the federal government and some of our state and local governments have shown through this is just stunning. We look with envy at some other countries in the world that have done a much better job in controlling this, responding to it. We just don't even have, you know, we had nurses in hospitals in New York City using garbage bags for protective equipment because they didn't have the proper gowns. All these kinds of things are very, very important if we want to have some kind of long-term recovery from it. So pumping a lot of cash into the system is good, but we also need to do some real sector investment, providing better hospital care, providing a better safety net, all kinds of things that are not being addressed by these bailout packages and don't seem to be under very serious consideration by our national leadership right now.
Well, Doug, you have your own talk show that is pretty popular. You talk to average Americans every day. What are their main grievances and concerns? What is the situation like on the ground?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because, you know, one doesn't get out much. I've been pretty much sealed into my apartment for the last 5.5 weeks. But I think from what I hear, people are very, very nervous about their jobs, their health. But also, I think a lot of, and people are probably underestimating this, an awful lot of psychological damage that's happening now. People are scared, confused, very stressed, and it's going to be hard to recover from that, too. People feel really battered, uncertain. Uncertainty is really pretty difficult to live with. This kind of profound existential uncertainty is very hard to live with. So, yeah, I think that's what people are worried about, all these things at once. It's just a big toxic package of disease and poverty and uncertainty. Then very, very poor leadership coming from the higher levels of government.
Well, China might be a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of epidemic prevention and control. Jiahe, I want to go to you. China, on the other hand, realizes the hit the pandemic had on the Chinese economy. That's why it tapped into its policy toolbox to boost the economy on monetary and fiscal stimulus measures. To what extent do you expect China's stimulus measures to work?
Well, currently we can see that China has been doing pretty well with this economy. The most important thing is that China has been successfully containing the coronavirus within just a month and a half. And amid that a month and a half, there is also one Spring Festival, which means usually factories would shut down for like 2 weeks. It's a Chinese tradition to celebrate for the Spring Festival. So totally speaking, Chinese economy has been shutting down for like a month or maybe 5 weeks, 6 weeks. That's all what has been doing. So that's the most important thing. You have to first control the virus in order to boost the economy. But China has been doing a lot of things to boost the economy as well. I mean, the PBOC has been lowering interest rate, injecting money into the open market. The fiscal policies has been taken, tax has been reduced, things like that. So if you look at all the indicators in the country right now, things like inflation, the financial market indicators, stock market, labor employment, industrial production, these things are pretty well indicating that China has been doing pretty good with fighting against the coronavirus and helping out its own economy.
That is certainly good to see. Doug, we've seen massive outflow of capitals from emerging economies to elsewhere, and there have been disruptions to global supply chains. How can we compare advanced economies to emerging markets, given the disparity in national resources to deal with the economic fallout?
Well, the emerging markets have some very serious problems. I mean, the IMF forecast is pretty harsh, not so much for Asia, but Latin America is going to get hammered pretty hard by this crisis. Commodity exporters are going to do quite poorly because of the decline in commodity prices. Oil is way down, but other commodity prices are falling as well. They really, a lot of emerging market countries don't have the state infrastructure to deal with a pandemic like this. You know, Haiti, for example, has, there are like 50 ventilators in the whole country. When as the disease spreads, the poorest countries are going to have a very, very difficult time coping with it. I hope the other guest is right that hot weather is good, because some of the poorer countries are the hotter countries, and I hope that climate effect reduces the spread of the disease. But we don't really know, that we don't have the data infrastructure, and we still don't know whether what kind of effect hot weather does have on this virus. So we're hoping for the best, but I'm not sure we're preparing for the worst just yet. But yeah, it's bad news for the poorer countries in the world, because they have debt problems, they have capital outflow problems, they have export problems, and they have state capacity problems. All those things are going to be a very severe challenge for the global South.
Well, there are bad news. For example, rising borders, halted trade and commerce, and rising xenophobia and nationalism. Jiahe, do you think COVID-19 will disrupt or even destroy the global supply chain as we know it?
Well, personally speaking, I don't really think so. I mean, the global supply chain is now very strong. I mean, if you look at all the countries participating in the global economy, China produces so many parts for the Apple phone, and the United States is earning money by selling the phone back to China, and Japan has so many Chinese tourists. So if you look at all economies, you have a very strong global supply chain compared with like 100 years ago or even 60 years ago. So it is really strong for the moment. And a very important thing is that the coronavirus is not going to be last there like what the AIDS has been doing. The AIDS has been in our societies for like half a century or something. But the coronavirus can't be there for so long. I mean, it's a short-term epidemic. It can be there. I mean, it's been in China for like 2 months, a month and a half or 2 months. And if you look at the cases in Europe, in Italy, in Spain, even in the United States, you can see the new discovered cases are starting to drop. That means people are doing their job. So I would say this will be controlled maybe in the next few months. It's a very short period of time for you to disrupt the whole global supply chain.
All right, gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this discussion. I want to thank both of my guests for joining us, Jiahe and also Doug Henwood. Thank you so very much. Come back again. And we'll take a short break. We'll be back right after this.